King Charles did not raise his voice. He did not summon reporters. And he did not make a public declaration from Buckingham Palace. Instead, behind closed doors and far from public view, he reportedly signed a private household order that would instantly alter one of the last remaining privileges Queen Camilla still exercised in his name. Those present allegedly understood the significance immediately. Camilla certainly did. Because according to reports, the decision was not about titles. It was not about public appearances. And it was not about her position beside the king. It was about authority, a specific form of influence that had quietly existed inside royal circles for years. The moment that authority disappeared, everything changed. Yet the most unexpected reaction did not come from Camilla. It came from Meghan Markle. Hundreds of miles away, Meghan reportedly learned about the king's decision through private channels. And according to royal commentators, her response was immediate. Not because she felt sympathy for Camilla, but because Charles had allegedly closed a route that Meghan believed could still be useful in the future. Before we reveal why this private decision caused such strong reactions throughout royal circles, make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss our latest royal updates. According to reports, Charles had been reviewing concerns involving internal household operations for some time. Most people never hear about these discussions. They take place privately. They remain inside palace walls. And they rarely become public knowledge. But occasionally, one decision becomes too significant to remain hidden. Sources claim the order signed by Charles removed a household privilege that allowed certain internal matters to move forward under his authority without requiring direct approval every single time. On paper, it looked like a procedural change. A simple administrative adjustment. Nothing dramatic. At least that was how it appeared from the outside. Inside royal circles, however, the meaning was very different. Camilla's title remained unchanged. Her status remained unchanged. Her ceremonial responsibilities remained unchanged. Yet one important source of influence had reportedly vanished overnight. According to insiders, this privilege had given her a unique position within the royal household. Not visible to the public. Not discussed openly. But understood by those working closest to the monarchy. Now that arrangement was reportedly over. And the consequences reached much further than anyone expected. Because Prince William had reportedly supported the king's decision. And Meghan Markle had reportedly been relying on the very pathway that Charles had just closed. Neither reaction was public. Neither was officially confirmed. Yet both would soon become central to a growing family dispute that threatened to deepen existing tensions inside the royal family. William reportedly knew about the decision before most people did. According to royal commentators, the Prince of Wales had become increasingly concerned about confusion inside the royal household. Not public confusion. Internal confusion. The kind that develops when instructions begin moving through multiple channels, and people are no longer certain whose authority carries the final word. For William, that uncertainty represented a growing problem. Sources claim he had privately encouraged his father to simplify the system and ensure that major household decisions came directly from the king himself. The future monarch reportedly believed that a single chain of authority was essential if the institution was going to avoid unnecessary tension. Charles appeared to agree. And according to reports, that agreement ultimately led to the private order that changed everything. But while William viewed the decision as a matter of structure and stability, Meghan Markle reportedly saw it very differently. News of the king's move allegedly reached California through private conversations taking place far from palace walls. The reaction was swift. Because according to several royal commentators, Meghan believed Camilla remained one of the few senior figures still willing to listen when discussions involving the Sussex family surfaced. The connection was never described as especially close. Nor was it officially acknowledged. Yet insiders claimed there was still a level of communication that occasionally proved useful. That possibility mattered. Especially as relationships between the Sussexes and other senior royals remained strained. Trust with Charles had reportedly become fragile. Relations with William showed little sign of improvement. And that left very few remaining pathways through which sensitive family discussions could quietly take place. According to reports, Meghan viewed Camilla as one of the last people capable of keeping certain conversations alive. Now that influence appeared to be fading. And with it, a possibility Meghan had hoped might eventually benefit her family. Sources claim there was even a private request connected to the Sussexes that had been moving through those same channels before Charles signed the order. Exactly what that request involved remains unclear. But according to royal observers, its future suddenly became uncertain the moment the king's decision took effect. Meanwhile, inside the palace, attention remained fixed on Camilla. Because while Meghan reacted from a distance, Camilla was facing the consequences directly. For years, she had operated with the confidence that came from being one of the king's closest and most trusted advisors. Now, according to reports, that confidence had been shaken. And what happened during her private conversation with Charles would only deepen the tension. Camilla reportedly remained silent for several moments after the decision was explained to her. Those familiar with royal protocol often describe silence as one of the most powerful forms of communication inside palace walls. And according to reports, this was one of those moments. The Queen Consort allegedly understood immediately that the issue was not about status. Her title remained secure. Her position beside the king remained unchanged. What had changed was something far more personal: confidence. For years, Camilla had reportedly enjoyed a level of trust that allowed her influence to extend beyond ceremonial duties. That trust had become one of the foundations of her role within the royal household. Now, according to sources, Charles was drawing a clear line between personal loyalty and institutional authority. The distinction mattered. Because while he continued to support Camilla as his wife, he reportedly no longer wanted important household decisions moving through unofficial channels. When Camilla finally spoke, insiders claimed the question was simple. Did Charles still trust her? The king reportedly paused before answering. Not because he lacked an answer, but because the answer carried consequences neither of them could ignore. According to reports, Charles explained that his decision was not intended as a punishment. It was intended as protection. Protection for the institution. Protection for the household. And protection against future misunderstandings that could damage the monarchy from within. Yet despite the explanation, the emotional impact remained. Sources suggest Camilla viewed the change as more than an administrative adjustment. To her, it felt like a reduction in confidence from the one person whose trust mattered most. Meanwhile, far from London, Meghan Markle was processing the same news from an entirely different perspective. Her concerns reportedly had little to do with palace procedures. Instead, they centered on opportunity. Royal commentators claim Meghan believed that maintaining even limited communication with certain senior family members could eventually help ease tensions surrounding the Sussex family. Not necessarily restore old relationships, but perhaps create space for future conversations. Now that possibility appeared to be slipping away. According to reports, Meghan expressed frustration during private discussions with Prince Harry. She allegedly felt that every remaining pathway connecting the Sussexes to the core of the royal family was gradually being closed, one after another. And the latest decision appeared to confirm those fears. Harry reportedly listened carefully, but sources claim he warned against reacting too quickly, because he understood something Meghan did not yet fully see. The king's decision was connected to a much larger concern inside the palace, a concern involving influence, loyalty, and a private request that had quietly been moving through royal channels for months. And once details of that request began to emerge, the entire story took an unexpected turn. Camilla reportedly spent the rest of the day trying to understand how the situation had changed so quickly. Only weeks earlier, everything appeared stable. There had been disagreements, certainly. Differences of opinion. Private frustrations. But nothing that suggested such a significant shift in authority was about to occur. That was why the king's decision felt so unexpected. According to royal insiders, the issue was never about a single action. It was about a pattern. A growing concern that private loyalties were beginning to influence matters that should have remained strictly institutional. Charles had reportedly been hearing those concerns from multiple directions. Senior advisors had raised questions. Household officials had expressed frustrations. And Prince William had become increasingly vocal about the need for clarity. The future king believed uncertainty inside the royal structure created unnecessary risks, especially at a time when public scrutiny of the monarchy remained intense. According to reports, several household decisions had recently become subjects of internal debate. Instructions were questioned. Approvals were challenged. And confusion occasionally emerged regarding who had authorized what. None of it reached the public. But inside palace walls, the tension was becoming difficult to ignore. That was where the private request entered the story. For months, Sources claim a sensitive proposal connected to Meghan and Harry had been quietly circulating through informal channels. The request was never publicly disclosed. Its details remain unclear. Yet according to royal commentators, enough senior figures knew about it to understand its significance. Some reportedly believed it deserved consideration. Others felt it would create new complications. Camilla allegedly found herself caught in the middle. Not because she controlled the outcome, but because she remained one of the few individuals willing to discuss the matter. That alone made her important to both sides. For Meghan, it represented possibility. For William, it represented uncertainty. For Charles, it represented a growing problem. Because every conversation surrounding the request seemed to lead back to the same question. Who was truly making decisions? And more importantly, whose authority was being used to support them? According to reports, Charles finally concluded that the situation could not continue. The monarchy required a single voice, a single process, and a clear understanding of responsibility. That belief ultimately led to the order he signed. Yet while the king may have viewed the decision as necessary, the emotional consequences were only beginning. Camilla felt diminished. Meghan felt shut out. William felt vindicated. And Harry found himself once again trapped between loyalty to his wife and loyalty to his family. What none of them realized was that the fallout from Charles's decision was about to spread far beyond the original dispute. Because a private conversation involving William would soon reveal just how serious the situation had become. William rarely involved himself in household disputes unless he believed something important was at stake. According to royal commentators, this was one of those occasions. The Prince of Wales had reportedly watched the situation develop for months. At first, he remained in the background, observing, listening, allowing senior advisors and palace officials to handle the matter. But as concerns continued to grow, William allegedly became convinced that a larger issue was emerging. The problem was no longer about a single request. It was about influence. Who possessed it? Who exercised it? And who ultimately answered for the consequences. Sources claim William expressed those concerns during a private conversation with his father. The discussion reportedly focused on the future of the monarchy and the importance of maintaining a clear chain of authority. According to insiders, William argued that uncertainty inside the royal household could eventually create problems far greater than any individual disagreement. Charles reportedly listened carefully. The king understood the argument. After all, he had spent decades watching institutions struggle whenever responsibilities became blurred. That experience may have shaped the decision he would eventually make. But while William viewed the matter through the lens of duty and structure, others viewed it through a far more personal lens. For Camilla, the issue remained deeply emotional. She reportedly believed years of loyalty and support had earned a level of trust that could not simply disappear overnight. The king's decision appeared to challenge that belief. Not publicly. Not dramatically, but in a way that felt impossible to ignore. Meanwhile, Meghan continued focusing on what the decision meant for the Sussex family. According to reports, she became increasingly frustrated by the realization that another avenue of communication had effectively vanished. Royal observers have long noted that relationships between the Sussexes and senior royals remain complicated. Progress often comes slowly. Setbacks arrive quickly. And opportunities for meaningful dialogue are rare. That was why the latest development attracted so much attention. Because according to sources, the private request linked to Meghan and Harry had represented more than a simple proposal. It represented hope. Hope that certain family relationships might eventually improve. Hope that future conversations could take place under better circumstances. And hope that some form of reconciliation remained possible. Now, that hope appeared to be fading. Inside the palace, however, advisors were reportedly becoming concerned about something else entirely. The growing divide between personal relationships and institutional responsibilities. The more they examined the situation, the clearer one conclusion became. The monarchy could not function effectively if important decisions were influenced by competing loyalties. That realization strengthened support for the king's decision. Yet it also guaranteed that the emotional fallout would continue. Because while the administrative issue may have been settled, the personal consequences were only beginning to unfold. And the next development would place Harry in an increasingly difficult position between his wife, his father, and the future king. Harry had spent years trying to balance two very different worlds. On one side stood the family he was born into. On the other stood the family he had built with Meghan. According to royal commentators, that balancing act had become increasingly difficult with every passing year. The latest situation only added to the pressure. Sources claim Harry understood why Meghan was frustrated. He knew how much hope she had placed in maintaining at least some form of communication with senior members of the royal family. He also knew how difficult it had become to rebuild trust after years of public disagreements and private tensions. Yet Harry reportedly viewed the king's decision differently. While Meghan focused on what had been lost, Harry focused on why the decision had been made in the first place. According to insiders, he believed Charles was acting out of concern for the institution rather than personal hostility. That distinction mattered, because it suggested the king's actions were not directed specifically at the Sussexes. Instead, they were part of a broader effort to strengthen internal control and reduce confusion within the royal structure. Even so, the consequences remained significant. The private channel that Meghan had reportedly viewed as a possible bridge now appeared weaker than ever. And without that connection, future discussions became far more uncertain. Sources claim Meghan struggled to accept that reality. She allegedly felt that every time progress seemed possible, another obstacle appeared. Another door closed. Another opportunity disappeared. The frustration was understandable. But inside the palace, officials were dealing with concerns of their own. According to reports, advisors had become increasingly worried about informal influence operating alongside official authority. The issue was not necessarily who benefited. The issue was whether the system itself remained clear and accountable. For Charles, that concern reportedly outweighed everything else. The king had spent decades preparing for his role. He understood that even small ambiguities could eventually create larger problems. That understanding shaped his decision. And once the order was signed, there was no intention of reversing it. Meanwhile, Camilla continued facing the emotional consequences. Although she maintained her public duties, insiders claim the experience left a lasting impression. The privilege she had lost was not merely symbolic. It represented years of confidence, access, and influence built through her relationship with Charles. Now, that chapter appeared to be ending. What nobody anticipated was that another private discussion would soon bring even more attention to the situation. Because as senior royals continued examining the fallout, questions began emerging about the request that had quietly triggered so much concern. And once those questions started being answered, the entire story took on an even more dramatic dimension. The private request had remained hidden for months. Only a small number of senior figures reportedly knew it existed. Even fewer understood how much attention it had attracted behind palace walls. According to royal commentators, that secrecy was intentional. The less people knew, the easier it would be to avoid unnecessary controversy. But as the fallout from Charles's decision continued spreading through royal circles, questions about the request became increasingly difficult to ignore. What exactly had been proposed? Who supported it? And why had it become such a sensitive issue? Sources claim the request was connected to future interactions involving the Sussex family. Not a return to official royal duties. Not a dramatic public reunion. But something more limited. Something designed to create opportunities for future family engagement under carefully controlled circumstances. To some, the idea seemed reasonable. To others, it introduced complications the monarchy could not afford. That disagreement created a quiet divide inside royal circles. Camilla reportedly believed certain conversations should remain possible. Not because she wanted to challenge anyone, but because maintaining dialogue often prevented conflicts from becoming permanent. William reportedly disagreed. According to insiders, he believed unclear arrangements only encouraged false expectations. If boundaries existed, they needed to be respected. If decisions had been made, they needed to remain consistent. Charles found himself caught between those perspectives. On one side stood the possibility of preserving family communication. On the other stood the responsibility of protecting institutional stability. As weeks passed, the king's concerns reportedly grew stronger. Every discussion seemed to circle back to the same issue. Authority. Who possessed it? Who exercised it? And who ultimately carried responsibility for its use? That was why the household override privilege became such a focal point. It was no longer just an administrative matter. It had become a symbol of a larger debate taking place within the monarchy itself. According to reports, Charles eventually concluded that no private channel should operate independently of direct royal approval. The decision was not aimed at any one person. It was aimed at restoring clarity. Yet clarity often comes with consequences. Camilla lost influence. Meghan lost an avenue of hope. And Harry found himself trying to manage growing frustration on multiple fronts. Meanwhile, William reportedly believed the king's action had prevented an even larger problem from developing later. But despite that belief, the emotional fallout refused to disappear. Because while the administrative decision had been finalized, the personal relationships affected by it were far from healed. And what happened during the next round of private family discussions would reveal just how deep those wounds had become. The next round of private discussions reportedly revealed just how much damage had already been done. On the surface, the issue appeared settled. The order had been signed. The privilege had been removed. And the palace had moved forward. But beneath that calm exterior, tensions continued to grow. According to royal commentators, the emotional consequences of the king's decision were proving far more difficult to resolve than the administrative ones. Camilla reportedly felt that years of loyalty had been overshadowed by a single decision. Not because she questioned Charles's authority, but because she questioned why the situation had reached that point in the first place. Sources claim she believed her intentions had never been harmful. She had simply tried to keep communication open where others preferred distance. Yet the outcome suggested that approach was no longer welcome. Meanwhile, Meghan remained equally frustrated. The possibility she had quietly hoped might eventually lead to improved family relations now appeared more distant than ever. According to insiders, she viewed the latest development as further evidence that the palace was becoming increasingly unwilling to consider compromise. Every path seemed blocked. Every opportunity seemed temporary. And every attempt at progress appeared to end the same way. Harry reportedly found himself caught in the middle once again. He understood Meghan's disappointment, but he also understood the concerns driving his father's decision. That left him in a difficult position. Supporting one side risked alienating the other. Remaining neutral satisfied nobody. As these tensions continued building, William reportedly remained convinced that the king had acted correctly. According to sources, the Prince of Wales believed short-term discomfort was preferable to long-term confusion. The monarchy depended on clear authority. Without it, internal disagreements could easily grow into larger institutional problems. For William, the issue was never personal. It was practical. Yet for everyone else involved, practicality offered little comfort. Because the story was no longer about procedures. It was about relationships. Relationships that had already endured years of strain. Relationships that now faced another significant setback. According to royal observers, what made the situation particularly painful was the realization that nobody involved had achieved exactly what they wanted. Camilla lost influence. Meghan lost hope. Harry lost confidence that reconciliation would come easily. And Charles risked creating new tensions while attempting to solve existing ones. Even those who supported the king's decision acknowledged the emotional cost. Because sometimes the hardest decisions are not the ones that create enemies. They are the ones that disappoint people you care about. And as the dust slowly began to settle, one final question remained. Had Charles's decision actually solved the problem? Or had it simply created a new chapter in a family conflict that was far from over? As the dust began to settle, one reality became impossible to ignore. King Charles had made his decision. The order was signed. The privilege was gone. And there was no indication that the palace intended to reverse course. According to royal commentators, that certainty changed the conversation entirely. The debate was no longer about whether the decision would stand. The debate was about what the decision meant for the future. For Camilla, the consequences were deeply personal. Sources claim she understood that her public position remained secure. She was still queen. She still stood beside the king. She still carried out her royal responsibilities. Yet something important had changed. A level of trust and influence she had reportedly relied upon for years had suddenly disappeared. For Meghan, the outcome was equally disappointing. The possibility of maintaining a useful connection through one of the few remaining sympathetic figures inside royal circles now appeared far less realistic. According to insiders, she viewed the situation as another reminder of how difficult rebuilding family relationships had become. Every potential breakthrough seemed to arrive with new obstacles. Every possibility appeared to fade before it could fully develop. Harry reportedly continued searching for balance. Balancing loyalty to his wife. Balancing respect for his father. And balancing the complicated reality of remaining connected to a family from which he had become increasingly distant. It was not an easy position. And according to royal observers, it only became more difficult as tensions continued lingering beneath the surface. Meanwhile, William reportedly believed the king's decision would ultimately strengthen the monarchy. The future king had long argued that clarity was essential. Authority needed boundaries. Responsibility needed accountability. And decisions affecting the institution needed to come from a single, clearly defined source. From his perspective, the latest development achieved exactly that. But even if the administrative issue had been resolved, the emotional wounds remained. Because this story was never really about a household privilege. It was never simply about influence. And it was never only about palace procedures. At its core, it was about trust. Who still had it? Who had lost it? And whether it could ever be fully restored. According to royal commentators, that question may continue shaping relationships inside the royal family for years to come. Charles wanted stability. Camilla wanted confidence. Meghan wanted opportunity. Harry wanted peace. And William wanted certainty. Yet in the end, not everyone could get what they wanted. The king's signature may have closed one chapter. But for many involved, it also opened another. One filled with unanswered questions, fragile relationships, and a future that remains far from certain. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe, leave your thoughts in the comments below, and let us know whose side you would have been on. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next Royal Update.